reasons befell the diversionary attacks launched by Horrocks' corps in the south. But these operations, despite the high cost in casualties, achieved their primary objectives, engaging 21st Panzer and holding it in the southern sector. On the Axis side, the situation, though serious, was not yet desperate. The chaos and disorganization that had followed the opening barrage was gradually being brought under control. General Stummer had been killed in the first few hours of the attack, and von Thoma had taken temporary command until Rommel could reach the front. Despite heavy casualties, the front had held, and the main Axis gun line still remained intact, safely west of the Oxalic line. For the remainder of that day, and most of the next, the fighting raged incessantly. On the 26th, Rommel transferred 21st Panzer from the south to buttress the defences in the northern sector. By now, the main thrust of the British attack had become obvious. The weight of shellfire alone betrayed their plans. But the redeployment of Axis armour west of the Oxalic line threatened to block this thrust, or at the very least, seriously disrupt Montgomery's timetable. Over the next few days, there was particularly heavy fighting in this sector. On the 27th, 21st Panzer launched a counterattack north of the Materia Ridge, and 90th Light, brought up from reserve, attacked an Australian penetration towards the coast. Neither of these efforts were successful, but the violence of the assaults prompted Montgomery to reinforce Australian operations on the flank, in the hope of halting the build-up of Axis forces in the centre and draining Rommel's last reserves. By the end of October, the British had carved out a large salient, anchored in the south along the Materia Ridge and in the north on high ground known as Point 29. To prevent any further exploitation of the salient, Rommel had deployed all 4 German divisions in a line of containment, stretching from the ridge to the coast. On October the 28th, Australian infantry, supported by elements of the 10th Armoured Division, launched an attack from Point 29 towards the coast. The operation secured a wedge of territory about 1.5 miles long, from which further attacks were launched 2 days later. These operations gradually drew more and more German strength to the area. In particular, 21st Panzer was being slowly dismantled. Some units placed in reserve, others thrown into holding the coastal corridor. The southern sector of the line was now held almost entirely by Italian formations. Inside the salient, Montgomery had been busy reorganizing his forces. The New Zealand 2nd Division was redeployed across the rear of the 51st Highland to take up positions vacated by the Australians attacking to the north. Part of the 50th Division was sent forward to reinforce the Highlanders, and the South Africans took over the defence of the southern shoulder. On November the 2nd, after another heavy artillery barrage, the 3 divisions in the centre of the salient, supported by the 1st Armoured Division, together with parts of the 7th and 10th, attacked towards the flank of the German positions at their vulnerable junction with the Italians. By midday, the British had punched a hole in the Axis defences nearly 2 miles deep. Their leading infantry and tanks were engaging the last significant defences before the open desert. A screen of German anti-tank guns situated on high ground to the west. Behind the guns, what remained of the Axis armour was assembling in preparation for a counterattack. The attack was launched from the northwest against the tanks and guns of the 1st Armoured Division. Both sides suffered heavily, but Axis reserves were by now exhausted and losses were irreplaceable. By the end of the day, the Afrika Korps was reduced to 35 fit tanks. As yet, however, there was still no sign of a breakthrough. Repeated attacks by British armour and infantry continued to meet with fierce resistance. But the gradual process of attrition was taking its toll. The Axis front was now little more than a thin crust. Much of what remained of the Italian infantry had begun withdrawing on the 3rd, leaving only scattered rearguards to hold the line. In the centre and north, the front was held by Afrika Korps veterans, supported by the Italian Ariete Division. These forces, however, were exhausted, hungry, and short of ammunition. Efforts to fall back in stages had been frustrated by lack of transport and by remorseless British pressure. On November the 4th, von Thoma was captured, fighting alongside his men in the front line. Huge gaps were now being torn in the Axis defences, and further fighting had become futile. Late that afternoon, Rommel bowed to the inevitable and authorised a full-scale withdrawal. That night, under cover of darkness, the last remaining rearguards slipped away to the west, leaving the field of battle to their enemies. While the battered remnants of Rommel's panzer army struggled westwards, under almost incessant attack from the air, the second great blow to Axis power in the Mediterranean was about to be delivered. In the waters off Morocco and Algeria, the fleet task forces of Britain and America, consisting of some 400 ships and more than 100,000 men, were approaching the French-held coast. As darkness fell on October the 7th, the warships and transports moved up to their assembly areas a few miles offshore. Remarkably, the fleet had sailed from its various ports of embarkation without losing a single vessel, and as the assault troops began disembarking, there was every indication that the element of surprise remained complete. Certainly, some efforts had been made at the highest level to enlist French compliance, but as the assault boats moved to their jumping-off points, no one could be confident of their success. The most violent reaction came, as Allied planners had feared, from French naval units, who were known for their pro-Axis sympathies. In all three target sectors, coastal batteries engaged the invasion flotillas, and at Casablanca, these were joined by French naval guns, including those of the battleship Jean Bart, still under construction. RAF fighters and bombers were sent from Gibraltar to provide extra cover to the landings and to attack the French warships.